Hello and welcome to the 38th Annual Fair Housing Month celebration, hosted by the Fair Housing Foundation. It is my great pleasure to welcome everyone to celebrate with us April as Fair Housing Month. The theme of today's celebration is Fair Housing, Transforming Communities. My name is Stella Verdeja and I am the Executive Director. I have worked with the organization for over 15 years and I have dedicated my professional career to helping the community and promoting equality for all. The Fair Housing Foundation has been providing fair housing services to municipalities for 58 years. We currently provide services to 24 cities in both LA and Orange counties and assist 6,000 clients annually. We provide a robust fair housing program that includes opening fair housing cases and investigating complaints of discrimination in housing. We provide counseling to landlords and tenants regarding their rights and assist with mediations. We take it a step further and assist clients at risk of losing their homes with a HUD certified counselor, opening cases for them and helping them work on their budget, creating a savings plan, and working on improving their credit score, so they're no longer considered at risk. The Fair Housing Foundation. Additionally, our outreach team works diligently throughout the year, reaching out to the community, providing workshops, presentations, and informational booths throughout our service area. The Fair Housing Foundation takes great pride in upholding the principles and the values of the Fair Housing Act and everything it embodies. April marks the 54th anniversary of signing of the Fair Housing Act, ensuring that individuals and families have the right to live where they want, free from discrimination. We will now play a short documentary from the National Fair Housing Alliance entitled 7 Days, highlighting the 7 days it took to pass the Fair Housing Act. I hope you enjoy.
Few in the nation believe that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
We've got some difficult days ahead. Like everybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I've looked over and I see the promised land. I may not get there with it, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Tonight I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anything.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been said. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Mr. President, yes, sir. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes. I'm afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed, but I moved here because it was a white community. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out. I think that the property values will go down if they're allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it. And we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
Of your presence, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take mine. You take our pain.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I'm going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. Martin Luther King come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill up. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
This afternoon. Fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the Bill of Freedom brings out a little route. We have come some of the way, not near all.
I'd still go so because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. That we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
documentary does an excellent job of explaining the steps and the voices that participated in passing the Fair Housing Act. While we have come a long way, housing discrimination continues to exist, from individuals and families being denied a home because of the color of their skin or where they come from, to landlords refusing to allow persons with disability to keep an emotional support animal. Currently, there's still more than 4 million instances of housing discrimination that occurs each year, and the vast majority are still underreported. Fair Housing Month is a time to recommit to our obligation to ensure that everyone has equal access to safe housing. I'm really excited to see so many attendees join us today. As you can see, we have a full agenda. From the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, I'm proud to announce our first keynote speaker will be Kara Brodfuehrer, speaking on the topic of fair housing today. As for our second speaker, we are fortunate to have Arezoo Shahbazi speaking on the topic of relationship violence. She works with Human Options, a nonprofit impacting individuals affected by relationship violence. Next, we have our annual fair housing contest for our youth, giving them an opportunity to win a prize for their great work. And for those that stay to the end, we have 11 appreciation raffles to show our gratitude for you taking the time out of your day to support fair housing. We have 12 poly pies, we have a rock climbing class, and much more. And lastly, closing remarks. Before we move on to the next speaker, I just want to note at any point you have any questions for any of the speakers or for the fair housing staff, we will be providing you an email at the end so you can forward any questions you may have. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed today's celebration. Next speaker is Ms. Cindy Guzman.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy Guzman. I'm the case analyst. I am responsible for overseeing the Fair Housing Department. I am responsible for all case management, investigation, analysis, and resolution of fair housing discrimination. Up next, we have Kara Brodfuehrer. Kara is a wonderful speaker. I've had the pleasure of attending several webinars where Kara has been a presenter. Kara is a senior FHF counsel with DFH Education and Outreach Unit. She focuses on educating Californians about their rights under laws enforced by DFH, including the Fair Employment and Housing Act. Kara was previously a staff attorney with the National Law Project, where she led the California-based initiatives, including to provide extensive support to Californians, attorneys in the areas of eviction defense, low-income housing, tax credit, and housing preservation. As a senior attorney at Law Foundation of Silicon Valley's Mental Health Advocacy Project, representing low-income tenants in a wide variety of landlord-tenant disputes, affirmative litigation, and civil commitment hearings. She began her legal career at California Rural Legal Assistance, where she focused on improving public infrastructure, fair housing, and promoting environmental justice in disadvantaged unincorporated communities. She has a BS in social work from the State University of New York, Albany, and a GD from Golden Gate University School of Law. Please help me welcome Kara Brodfuehrer.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see my presentation. And then get this started. Thank you again for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Like she said, my name is Kara Brodfuehrer, and I'm from the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, DFH. And just our little lawyerly disclaimer, because we always have to have one. So the guidance and information I'm giving you today is just for informational purposes, and it doesn't establish substantive policy or rights, and it's not legal advice. So just a little bit about DFH, and then I'll go into today's topic. The mission of the Department of Fair Employment and Housing is we are California's civil rights agency. We have a giant job of attempting to protect the people of California from unlawful discrimination in many areas, including housing, public accommodations, bias-motivated violence, and human trafficking. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I think that the last video was super helpful in kind of setting up what I planned on talking about today too, is just kind of, to talk about fair housing today, you really need to think about kind of where things came from. And I am gonna focus a little bit on the history in California, because I think it's important to kind of think about kind of where we've come from and where things are. So In California, in 1959, the Unruh Civil Rights Act was enacted, and that law protects people from discrimination in businesses and business accommodations, and that includes housing accommodations. And in 1963, so this is before the events in the video that we just watched, California enacted the Rumford Fair Housing Act. It was one of the first, if not the first, housing discrimination laws in the country. Unfortunately, there was quite a backlash in California to enacting this law. And in 1964, there was a Proposition 14, and it was sponsored by the California Real Estate Association. And they basically wanted to render it null and void, the Fair Housing Act in California, by adding a provision to the California Constitution prohibiting the state from limiting the ability of a person to sell or rent. And basically, it's basically saying that you can discriminate against whoever you want. And sadly, it passed by a majority vote of 65%. And this is a photo actually on the right of a protest in California. I think it was in 1965, where people were protesting Proposition 14. But there were legal challenges to the law, and in 1966, the US Supreme Court actually invalidated Proposition 14. And they were basically like, you can't have a state program or law that encourages private discrimination. And, it also violates federal protections for things like equal protection. In that case was called Reitman v. Mulkey. And I'm not going to go into too much because that video did a much better job than I will. But shortly after, the Fair Housing Act was enacted in the wake of Dr. King's murder. And, another thing to note, and I have a photo of some Black veterans, veterans of color on the right. Around this time, in addition to the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King, a lot of veterans, a lot of people of color were serving in the military in Vietnam, and they were coming home and trying to take advantage of government assistance for home buying and renting, and they weren't able to do so. And, because there's rampant housing discrimination, many areas had things in the laws that said people of color couldn't buy in those particular areas. So, it also was a small push in the direction of the Fair Housing Act as well. So let's talk a bit about redlining. I feel like this is a term that's used quite a bit in the fair housing world and community. And so I'm just going to give you a quick definition. Basically, redlining is really referring to, there were government homeownership programs, and they were created in the 30s, like during the New Deal, kind of coming out of the Great Depression. And the programs basically offered government insured mortgages for homeowners. It was basically it's kind of like, we had the Great Recession in the housing crisis in like 2008, kind of in a similar fashion. The government basically created this program to kind of keep people from losing their homes, and also to just like provide people with assistance in buying a home. And as part of redlining, and the more famous part of it that we still hear about, are that as part of this process, they actually vetted properties, and they went around to many cities across the country, and they essentially categorized areas of cities and counties, and they ranked them. They ranked them by what they call loan worthiness, and ranked neighborhoods from best to hazardous. And this obviously really had an impact on kind of who would qualify for this assistance. And as you can see, and this is a map on the left of Los Angeles. So they were color coded, and places were ranked C and D in areas where property values, they're saying, are most likely to go down. And they were basically discouraging banks from participating in the program and giving mortgages to people buying homes in those areas. And not surprisingly, most of the C and D areas, so the red and the yellow areas, were neighborhoods where Black and other people of color were living. And this was in like the 30s and 40s. And this is the map of Oakland. I pulled this one up because I live here, so I thought it would be interesting to kind of see. But as you can see on this map, if you look, towards the top of the map where it says Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, the green areas were rated best, and that's 15%. So the green areas tended to be away from the San Francisco Bay, which is at the bottom of the map. And the blue areas as well tended to be, higher up away from the water. And then, getting closer to the water and to the bay were the yellow, they're calling them on this map definitely declining, and red, hazardous. So this is what the maps looked like. This was, God, almost 30 or almost 100 years ago, probably like, 80 or 90 years ago. So it's been a while, but I was really interested in looking to see kind of how things have changed, because, as this map kind of represents, and as the history of redlining represented, the areas that were considered to be green and blue were the areas that, did not have any people of color or very few people of color, and the more quote unquote hazardous areas tended to be where people of color lived. So, and I'm just going to read kind of what the map said. So this is grade C. This is the yellow areas. They said that the neighborhoods are categorized by infiltration of a lower grade population. So pretty explicitly racist analysis. And basically telling mortgage lenders to either not lend to people at all for houses, and for people that live in this area, or be very cautious. And for the red areas, the hazardous areas, they said that they're, and this is the Oakland map, categorized by detrimental influences in a pronounced degree, an undesirable population, or an infiltration of it. And they basically said, don't make loans in these areas at all. So let's look at the map now. So on the right is the map that I just showed you in the beginning. And on the left is the demographics of Oakland as of 2010. This is taken from HUD has an affirmatively furthering fair housing mapping tool. And the orange dots represent white residents, and the blue and kind of turquoise represent Black, Asian Pacific Islander, and Latinx folks. And as you can see, not much has changed. The areas at the top of the map, farther away from the San Francisco Bay, are still predominantly white, and the areas closer to the water are still predominantly people of color. So I think this is an important area to think about, because it shows kind of the history and effect of redlining, and kind of what it set in motion, and how it's been very difficult to dismantle and to get through. Because you can see there's some change, but not a lot of change. And I looked up maps for a couple other areas. So this is the city of San Diego. And as you can see, again, the red areas were where most people of color lived, or especially Black residents, in yellow, and then higher and higher up where the white residents were living. And again, it's changed a bit more than Oakland has, but there's still a pretty, significant pattern that looks pretty similar to what it was like before, where most of the white residents are to the top of the map, and most of the people of color were towards the bottom. And this is also as of 2010. And here's the city of Fresno. I actually lived there for a few years when I had my first job at California Rural Legal Assistance. And it's a little harder to see in this map, but it's also very similar. It's changed a little bit more in Fresno, but again, you can still see the effects of redlining. And I haven't looked at, I've read a lot of analysis of redlining over the years. And I'm gonna move my cat really quickly, sorry everybody. But if you look at the analysis of redlining across the years, if you look at many cities and the current demographics, they're gonna still match up quite a bit. So, all right. So let's talk more about housing discrimination today. Obviously, there's still a decent amount of housing segregation, even just showing the effects of redlining in the beginning of the presentation. But this is a 2017 study, and it's not surprising that people of color are more likely to report discrimination when trying to rent or buy. African Americans being the largest, most impacted group, in Asian, Latinx, Native American, and very few people who identify as white said that they experienced housing discrimination based on race. And today, housing insecurity, as I'm sure many of you know, still disproportionately impacts groups with protected characteristics. Housing insecurity, and what I mean by that are, people who lack secure housing due to like many different factors. And it really looks at like things like affordability, quality, safety, overcrowding, and homelessness. And, most people, HUD and the federal government has found that if you pay about 30% of your income or less for housing, that would be considered affordable. So people who are experiencing housing insecurity are often paying much, much more than that. They're really stretched thin with their housing costs, which means that they're unable to purchase and buy other really important necessities like, their utilities, food, transportation, medical care. And a study, and I have all the sources at the bottom in case you want to take a look, but this statistic is actually, they were looking at housing and race during the pandemic, because as I'm sure a lot of us experienced, the pandemic kind of showed a spotlight on issues of housing that were already there, and made things even more difficult. So in a study in the first year of the pandemic, they found that Latinx and Black renters had seen really large increases in housing insecurity, with 44% of renters in both groups experiencing housing insecurity during the pandemic. So almost 50% of people in those two groups. And that represented during the pandemic an increase of about 11 percentage points for Latinx renters and 7 percentage points for Black renters. So COVID definitely did not help things at all. And I also want to talk about some of the other protected characteristics. LGBTQI people are 2.2 times more likely to be homeless than those who don't identify in that with that group. And people with disabilities, there's obviously a huge deficit in the number of units accessible to people with disabilities. In preparing for this presentation, I was just trying to kind of get an idea and was, trying to look up kind of where things are. And one statistic that really stood out to me was that as of last year, across the United States, there was a deficit of over 7 million units needed for affordable housing. And they were saying only less than 5% of those units were accessible in some way, and less than 1% of those accessible units were accessible for people with a wheelchair. So, just thinking about, housing discrimination and people with disabilities and how high the stakes must be, because, for some people with disabilities, it's almost impossible to find housing given those numbers. So overall, 7 million renters with disabilities are considered to be moderately or severely cost burdened. And like I talked about before, this means they pay more than 30% of their income on rent and are more likely to face eviction. And like I was saying, less than 5% of housing nationwide is accessible for people with mobility difficulties. And again, the source is right there. But if you look at there's data available on all the protected groups. In California, obviously, we have a much wider group of folks that are protected, and our fair housing laws are a bit stronger than those on the federal level. And this is kind of how things shook out for DFEH. So the department, as many of you know, because we're California Civil Rights Agency, and we're charged with enforcing the fair housing laws. We do many different things, and obviously we do outreach and education, which is what I'm doing today. But also, if someone believes that they have been subjected to unlawful housing discrimination or other types of discrimination, they can file a complaint with us, and we investigate those complaints. We mediate many of those complaints, and sometimes we bring cases to court. We also just do affirmative litigation in an effort to enforce California's civil rights laws. And in 2020, this is kind of how things shook out as far as housing discrimination complaints. We received 880 individual complaints of housing discrimination, although one of the other speakers said it's incredibly underreported. And this is kind of the different protected basis and characteristics that were involved with these complaints of housing discrimination. And often when people are making complaints, they're making complaints based on membership in several different protected groups. So for example, like, a person of color who is also disabled. So that would be like two different protected characteristics. So this is how things kind of shook out. And let's talk about kind of what's being done. And, I don't want to leave this on like a totally dire note. So, let's talk about some new stuff that's happening at the department. And I can also leave a little bit of time for questions. As of January 1st of this year, our Fair Employment and Housing Council has been very busy. They're basically charged with taking California's fair housing laws and writing regulations. So like kind of interpreting them and giving us all guidance, and and it still has the force of law, and basically just giving us some ideas and some examples of kind of how these laws apply in the real world, essentially. And what they do is they take certain areas and they really expand upon them and just talk about kind of this protection and kind of what that can look like. And so this year we had several pieces of our housing discrimination regulations were expanded. One, and I have all the citations here in case folks want to check it out, involves source of income discrimination. We, as many of you know, and I think a lot of you may know, there was a law that was enacted in 2018 or 2019 that added Section 8 discrimination as part of source of income discrimination, which essentially means that housing providers can't discriminate against folks who have Section 8 vouchers or any other types of tenant-based financial assistance, including, the emergency grants that were happening because of COVID. And so the regulations go into a lot of detail in that areas. And I think they did a really good job of kind of writing them in a way that like everybody can understand. They tried to really stay away from, making it just so lawyers can understand, which I think is really important. So I recommend checking those out. They really define like the different types of income and what source of income discrimination can look like. And the council also included new regulations on reasonable modifications for people with disabilities. So just like reasonable accommodations, where there are actually a few years ago where there are significant numbers of regulations that cover people with disabilities and reasonable accommodations. Reasonable modifications are a change to the actual like building structure. So like we're talking like a wheelchair ramp or installing a grab bar in someone's bathroom. And they're a little bit different from reasonable accommodations. So the council decided to write some regulations on those, and I think they're incredibly helpful. They also enacted regulations on intentional discrimination and discriminatory advertisements, and all the citations are there. And I also wanted to talk about Assembly Bill 468 because I think there's an incredible amount of confusion. So if you don't know what Assembly Bill 468 is, it's basically, it's a law that was enacted last year, so it went live January 1. And it's created a lot of confusion because it placed some conditions on healthcare practitioners who are providing documentation of someone's need for an emotional support animal, especially an emotional support dog. But the most important thing that you need to take away from this part of the presentation is they don't impact fair housing law. They make no changes and have no impact on, any of the laws enforced by DFEH, including the Fair Employment and Housing Act, the Disabled Persons Act, the Unruh Civil Rights Act, or federal law, the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504. This law is confusing because it has some restrictions, but it also is very clear that it does not have any impact on fair housing law. And so us as a department, and we found that it was incredibly important for us to get the word out as quickly as possible that this law doesn't actually impact fair housing law. And so housing providers have to allow reasonable accommodations under the rules described in our other presentations on disability rights. And we also put out some guidance because, again, we were concerned that the public is confused about this. I've done quite a few presentations this month because it's Fair Housing Month, and I feel like it's very clear that the public is confused, but I want to point you to where our guidance is, and it's actually available in many different languages. And there's not a good link that I can give you. So if you go to our website, go to publications, then posters, guides, and fact sheets, and then go to housing, and then you're going to see it's called Emotional Support Animals in Fair Housing Law, and that's where our guidance is. And it's now available in Chinese, Korean, Spanish, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. But I highly recommend checking that out and sharing it with folks. And here's some resources as well. There's our website, the housing regulations. I also wanted to point you to our discriminatory ads project. So in addition to folks being able to file fair housing complaints with us, you can actually, if you are like going through Craigslist or, and you see a discriminatory ad, if it's it says no Section 8 allowed, or, only for families without children, or, even if you see an employment ad that's discriminatory, you can actually go to this address and report it. You don't have to file like a full complaint, it's anonymous, but it really helps us kind of track these ads. And what we'll do is then we'll look into the ad, and then we often will send letters to those that post it, telling them to take it down and educating them about the fair housing laws. So please send that information our way. And another thing that we're doing, which is a little new for us that I forgot to add to this list, is that DFEH received funds from HUD and now are receiving regular funds from the California legislature to contract with fair housing agencies to do some fair housing testing. And so we've embarked on this about a year ago, and it's continuing, and we're hoping to kind of get a better idea of kind of what's happening, and it'll give us some more avenues to enforce the fair housing laws. So it looks like I have about 5 minutes, and there is a question, so I'm going to answer it. So let's see. Are not accepting security deposits, move-in fees by third-party agencies a form of discrimination? So I'll say that again. The question is it, I think they're asking, is it source of income discrimination to not accept security deposits, move-in fees by third-party agencies? And yes, that would be discrimination. As long as it's lawful verifiable income, a housing provider has to accept it. And there's, the regulations talk about kind of, that you have to accept lawful verifiable income. So for example, from an organization like Seasons of Sharing that often provides security deposits, and it also, the regulations also say things about how a housing provider needs to comply with the program requirements, things like Section 8, or, if somebody is getting a grant from a third party, you have to fill out, paperwork and provide the necessary information. So you can't like just by default not comply, because that would still be considered to be housing discrimination. And take a look at the chat. And it looks like that was the main question. We got one more. Let's see. Okay. It looks like that was really my last question that I received, the only question. And I super appreciate everybody's time. And I think I put my information here. If folks have questions, about the presentation or kind of things going on at DFH, feel free to shoot me an email. I can't weigh in on complaints or anything like that, but if you want a presentation or you just have questions about things I talked about, I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction. So with that, I think I'm done.
Well, thank you, Kara, for this wonderful presentation. Up next, we have Martha Torres.
Hello, my name is Martha Torres, Community Engagement Liaison with the Fair Housing Foundation. I oversee the Education and Outreach Department and assure that FHF has a strong presence in the community by bringing awareness about the services we provide. I also help bridge the gap between FHF and the needs of our diverse communities by offering and developing educational workshops on rights and responsibilities and current issues impacting housing. On a more personal note, for fun, I love hosting family and friends at home. Now, during the pandemic, while we were asked to shelter in place and socially distance, a lot of times that brought up very stressful situations for a lot of folks. In fact, it has been reported that there was an increase in domestic violence and sexual harassment cases nationwide. And that is why it's so important to hear from our next speaker, Arezoo Shahbazi, speaking on an overview of relationship violence. Arezoo is the Prevention, Education, and Marketing Manager with Human Options. She has been with Human Options for 5 years and oversees the prevention education programs, outreach, and marketing efforts. Prior to her current position, she was the Newport Mesa Family Resource Center Program Supervisor. Arezoo has a bachelor's degree in psychology and master's in social work from Cal State University Fullerton, and 12 years of experience in working with youth and families and developing age-appropriate prevention programs. Please help me welcome Arezoo.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, Martha. Thanks, everybody, for giving me time and space today. As Martha mentioned, my name is Arezoo Shahbazi. I am the Prevention, Education, and Marketing Manager here with Human Options. And so, as Martha mentioned, obviously the nature of all of your roles and the work that you do in housing is so vital in this month. And the work that we do as it relates to the victims and survivors we serve, has that intersection is at the forefront of everything that we do. Safety is at the forefront of everybody should have that right. And so unfortunately, the pandemic really shed light on the fact that victims and survivors have very limited housing options. Being isolated in their homes really allowed for agencies like us to really look at what the needs are for our community and how we can best reach them. So hopefully you're all able to see my presentation. I will just go ahead and get started. So for those of you that may not know, and if you are already familiar with Human Options, and if you're not, just a friendly reminder of what we do, but we ignite social change by educating Orange County to recognize relationship violence as an issue that affects everyone, advocating for those affected by abuse, extending a safe place for victims, and empowering survivors on their journey to healing. And what's really important about our mission is the fact that we talk about relationship violence as such a broad spectrum, versus really thinking about that traditional definition of what domestic violence is. And so sometimes in statistics and different facts, in the way that you might even hear how it's talked about in the community, you might hear these different terms. So you might hear domestic violence, which is the traditional term. You might hear intimate partner violence or IPV as it relates to those that are in intimate relationships. But the nature of our work recognizes that relationship violence can really affect everyone from young youth, teens, children, unfortunately, all the way to adults and their older adult children taking care of them. So the sad nature of relationships are is as much as we want to promote healthy and live, by that standard in our community, that isn't always the case in all relationships. And so when we think about victims and survivors, as I may talk about it in this during our time, it's really those who have been impacted currently or have experienced abuse by someone else. So someone else taking that power and control over them in some capacity. And so that's why we might call them a victim or survivor. And also sometimes, that victim or survivor, depending on where they're at, they may not even identify ever as a victim, or they're not there yet to call themselves a survivor. So we just want to give space to that. We also use the terms person who harms or abuser. And the reason we use these terms is because we want to give space for the person who maybe is, experiencing these behaviors and taking out these behaviors on someone else. And so to, create a more not so harsh term, like a perpetrator, like that has been traditionally used, but to find that person who's harming that can give space to get help and heal themselves. And why this is important, the nature of our work and relationships, it intersects with so many different other issues. It affects everything from sexual assault and violence, where, this month in April, it's actually Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so it really, again, highlights the power and control and, the abuse that has taken over victims and survivors. We know 1 in 4 women and men experience domestic violence, so it really does affect everyone. So it doesn't discriminate between specific genders or groups or populations. Unfortunately, the trends really have been showing that even trans people or different or other groups that may not have access to care are double or triple even sometimes affected by it. And so 54% of trans people have experienced IPV in some point in their lives or in their relationships, which is, and these are what's reported. So I always speak to these numbers. This is what we know about. And there's so much that goes underreported. There's so many individuals that do not have that access to care or know how to get the help that they want. Digital abuse is something that's really gone on the rise, and we are seeing the repercussions of it. And again, it's not just one form of abuse. It could be paired with psychological. It starts sometimes as digital and escalates to physical, even in some cases. So we really have been seeing these trends over the last several years. And with the pandemic, it's only heightened and increased between the stay-at-home orders and even where we're at today. Many people may be surprised to think, when we think about homelessness and talk about homelessness, it's, one of the leading causes as to why women and their children even become homeless and end up on the street or potentially living out of their car is because of relationship violence or the relationships that they enter. And so it's when you think about how this affects the housing world and how, where this intersection of housing insecurity and relationship violence comes into play, it's really the fact that people who are experiencing housing insecurity are 4 times more likely to experience some form of domestic violence. 57% of all homeless women report DV as the immediate cause of their homelessness. So again, access to care being one of the reasons. Even what happens beyond when they get those immediate and emergency services. So, which is why we see 84%. And again, these are the numbers that are reported. So 84% of DV shelter residents report that they need assistance finding affordable housing. And obviously in Orange County in California, we know how expensive it is to, live in the state, but not only do that, but to do it independently, breaking free from a relationship where, financial means could have been lost, in escaping and getting out of that relationship. So it's something really to consider and think about. Just as a shared definition as to what relationship or domestic violence is, it's a pattern of abusive behaviors used to exert power and maintain control by one person over another. And the really big things about this, it's those bolded terms right there. It's a pattern, it's that power and control piece, right? It's the fact that it's not one incident, it doesn't occur on a one-time basis. It takes shape in many ways, different forms, all throughout different points in time. And so it's not always the same thing, but it can just continue for ongoing years, periods of time, etc. And again, it comes down to taking that power and control in different ways and in different aspects. And so when we take a step back and really try to understand, the root causes or, where does all of this start from? When we think about it, people are not born to harm. When we're brought into this earth, that is not the behavior that individuals come with, right? It's something that it's learned, whether it's passed down from one generation to another, whether it's learned through societal influences, cultural influences, even in home, what that environment looks like, what the community around them is. So the fact that One can say that people are born this way. That's not the case. It's something that's been learned. The good thing about this is the fact that as much as it can be learned, it can also be unlearned. So if there are behaviors that have been put into play at an earlier age or through a period of time, you can be resilient. You can get the tools to be able to change that pattern or behavior of what that might have looked like, whether it's receiving it or breaking away from the person who is harming it, right? Or the person is harming. I mentioned in the very beginning that it doesn't discriminate, right? And so it really does affect everyone. It affects all ages, at all different age groups, all different cultural influences, all different backgrounds, all different socioeconomic statuses. It really doesn't discriminate. And that's the sad truth about this issue, is that it really is found in every space. It's something that everybody knows or has experienced or will know somebody who is in an unhealthy, at minimum, if not an abusive relationship. When we think about some of the underlying roots again and causes, some people, may want to assume or associate it with, drugs, alcohol, and potentially stress. But it's a complicated relationship. It isn't the reason why it happens. It only enhances it and only heightens what the situation can be. So, and oftentimes when people may talk about it and maybe consider that, oh, it's because of this or that, that isn't the case, right? Again, it comes down to that power and control piece, that aspect of it got learned somewhere and it became a part of that normalcy in life, right? And again, it's that pattern, it's never a one-time occurrence. It may look different, it may feel different and sound different, but it's that pattern, it's that ongoing piece that continues for, in different ways and different types. And so when you think about the types, there are different ways where a person takes that power and control over an individual. And traditionally, when people talked about domestic or relationship violence, you really used to only talk about the physical or maybe some verbal and emotional. But when we really take consideration to all the different ways that somebody can abuse someone, it really is alarming to see all the different ways and how they can even almost go hand in hand in taking that abuse and putting into power, right? Like, for example, digital. Digital may be taken, in forms of, asking to use passwords, taking access to all of their different communications, phone, all the different ways that they connect with people. Maybe they tag them, and post, berating things about them, stealing their passwords, pressuring them to do different things. If they don't, post them on social, which we're seeing so much. We've seen actually about an 86% increase in digital abuse cases that's happening, and digital leading to emotional abuse, psychological abuse, potentially physical abuse. When we think about verbal abuse, when we think about that, it's the traditional name calling, refusing to trust you, acts of jealousy, isolation being a really big one. And with COVID, obviously, isolation was very easy for the people who were harming and abusers to enact, right? Because the nature of the stay-at-home order forced people basically to stay under the same roof. Well, that isolation piece became very easy for the person who was harming, and it became a lot harder for the victim who was in that situation to maintain social support if they had it, create social support, and try to, access help if they needed it. Gaslighting is a real thing. We talk about, it's kind of a buzzword right now. A lot of people talk about it, but it really is a form of power and control. Again, it's, creating that power in that sense of, that person feeling crazy or things that are happening when they're really not, a sense of humiliation, blaming them for the abuse as to why things were happening. And when we think about during, the orders, at least there was some element of break or reprieve between both the abuser and even the victim, where when they were trapped in the home, there was no access to get any kind of, calm or, access to de-escalate anyway, whether it was the gym or, just different things like that. And so it only made it harder being under the same roof. When we think about, financial abuse, again, there's just so much of that power and control that comes into play, things like taking financial like paychecks away and just putting them into a bank and not having an account, access to the account could be, being prevented from actually, managing the finances, only be giving a certain amount or an allowance, or the person is, monitoring what they're expending on. It could be not access to having credit cards or financial, acts during the pandemic. It made it even harder maybe to be able to access finances. Refusing or even letting him to work in some ways. And again, we found that with, again, being, isolated in homes, for some individuals, that work from home thing was not a great situation. It was very dangerous. It was very risky for that individual to be able to even do their work. And sometimes their partner even giving them space to do that work. And then again, sexual, obviously with reproductive coercion, that still is a thing, withholding or even controlling how a person takes birth control, what their decisions are about, birth control, abortion, having children, all of these different things. So when we think about it again, it all comes down to power and control. It's that mechanism, it's that way, it's that tool that that person is taking over an individual. When we think about, why don't people just leave? Why does somebody even want to put themselves through this? Well, there's so many different reasons, right? Everything from spiritual reasons to financial dependence. Will they be able to, be independent and manage, their life for them and potentially their children if they need to? Will they have the financial means to access to, some sort of, stability in their lives, maintaining a sense of normalcy, access to food, basic needs, all of that. Immigration status, for folks, there was some that was a threat held against them, whether or not they would be deported or sent back into a country where they were, initially came over here for freedom, and now their partner is using that as a vessel to control them and dictate what their next move is based on what their status is. Cultural norms obviously taking a big role in it, where sometimes there is that expectation to stay in a relationship, or maybe divorce is not even something that's even believed in if marriage was a thing, and forcing people to kind of stay within that relationship under the notion of what the cultural expectations might be. And obviously at the end of the day, these relationships are chosen. A person gives their heart to another person. They care about them, which is why they end up in these relationships sometimes, and so there's that element of hope and that chance for things to get better potentially. And again, one of the largest barriers is that physical isolation. So even with the pandemic occurring, that increased that actual physical isolation limited the accesses to care that people could have. It limited the housing options that people could even learn about within the community that they needed, because everything was so quiet and because everything was so unavailable. And the root of all of this comes down to the cycle of violence. It really comes down to these three phases, and as to why this continues to happen again. It's the cycle that passes from one generation to a generation. And when we think about who these people are that we engage with, it's that, that person that we've given our sense of trust, love, respect, all these different things to, which is why the relationships typically start in that honeymoon phase where everything is really great and everything is roses and butterflies and love is in the air, and everything seems so great. And over time, it gets into this tension building phase where that individual starts feeling a little bit more on eggshells, or maybe they're noticing their partner's a little bit more aggressive or harsh, or some of the behaviors that they maybe didn't notice before they're noticing now. And so this tension building phase sits for quite some time, and eventually it gets to this explosion phase. And during the pandemic, again, going back to having that sense of reprieve, having these different outlets, being trapped in the home with the partner, a lot of these individuals were sitting in this tension and explosion phase. They never got to the makeup phase where things could get back to normal. And if they did, again, it's because the abuser has that tact and knows exactly what tools and vessels to use to keep that person in the relationship. But a lot of times this phase, it isn't necessarily cyclical. It doesn't necessarily go in any order per se. It can just hop around between phases depending on the situation. And things like the pandemic only can highlight the situation and create more either tension or actual explosion where things are actually happening, where it could be an abusive episode or a physical act, or, berating them, or, texting something, or posting it on social media and that sort of a thing. And so the cycle not only affects the victim or the person who's being harmed, but it also affects those around them, those people that are in the home with them, those that are in the community with them get affected by it. And so when we think about children in this case, 36% of calls that are made to the police are reported by children, which is even the saddest part to think about. Is these calls that are happening, it's coming from people that are coming within the homes, and it's these young innocent children that are having to act out to get that level of help. And when we think about, and just to add, in California, when a child does witness any form of domestic violence in the home, it is considered child abuse. And that's something to really take a note of, is that a lot of times people say, oh, the child's in the other room, they don't know what's going on. But in fact, that is damaging and can have detrimental effects to the child if they don't have access to care and support and all the different things that they need to maintain resilience and social support and protective factors. And again, as we were, talking about just the pandemic in 2020, when we had the stay-at-home orders, our agency saw a massive spike in our hotline calls. We had a 46% increase in our hotline, significant increases in a lot of people reporting strangulation, even with our partners that we work in law enforcement. Repeated also shared the same thing, that on the repeated calls that they went out to. During these past 2 years, they started noticing more lethal situations, more situations of strangulation, more dramatic calls, and more severe cases where they were in higher, I guess, in greater need that they traditionally had been, and in needed more of emergency services. And so for all of you today, if there's anything, that you can take away, is by being able to, at minimum, recognize, what relationship violence is when it's happening, and at minimum, being able to respond by giving a resource. And so if you can catch some of these red flags early on, like, quick involvement, being extremely jealous, which sometimes can be blurred to be seen as, a form of caring or concern. That notice of isolation, where somebody has started with maybe had a large group or a big group of friends or a support system, and now it's dwindled down to just them and that partner. And again, this pandemic has only added to these things. By recognizing these red flags, by recognizing the cycle of violence, by understanding the roots of it, and being able to give a resource. So if you do, catch yourself in a situation where someone is comfortable enough to disclose, or you yourself might be in this situation, or working with someone who has identified, being in a relationship that is unhealthy or abusive, there are 4 domestic violence agencies in the county. I don't think it's enough to be able to do the work that we do, but at least there are 4 resources out there, and of course the national line. And at minimum, I always love to share this as a tool that, for those of you that love apps, there is a My Plan app, which really helps individuals navigate from identifying whether they're in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, how to potentially create a safety plan to keep themselves safe, and what potential next steps there are. I think it's a great tool and resource to share with folks from young to all ages that welcome technology. And for those of you that may not be aware, this coming Wednesday is Denim Day. So if you have your jeans, please wear them. Stand in solidarity with victims and survivors of sexual assault. We welcome pictures, so tag us on social media. We love to lift and share those that stand with all those that we serve. And just a quick sharings of our services. As I mentioned, we really have services for everyone at any point in what they're when it comes to relationships. From the person who needs emergency shelter, we have a 30-day program, all the way to a person who is unsure about whether they're in an unhealthy or potentially abusive relationship, to be able to get access to care. We are located at 8 different family resource centers in the county to be able to access that care. We have legal advocacy services, which can give direct linkages to legal support, and being able to guide such a complex issue in that system. And then again, our prevention education team, where we go out into community and do education offerings for those that are interested in bringing awareness or just deepening their knowledge of the work that we do. These are some of the locations that I mentioned, the 8 family resource centers. You can always find the one that's closest to you. If you're unsure, you can always just start with our hotline. I always say the hotline is the best starting point. It's always a great start to know where to get linkage to the best help that you need. And we also partner with amazing other community-based organizations. So we always like to leverage those that we partner with to be able to give full access to care. If you yourself want any presentations for your agency, or anybody that you can think of or wants any additional support, please don't hesitate to reach out to our email, and please follow us on social. We love your support in the digital space. And I will take a peek at the chat if there's any questions. All right, cool.
Thank you, Arezoo, for providing us with such important and valuable information. Up next, we have Christina Prado, our outreach coordinator, who will go over our poster contest.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Cristina Prado. I'm the outreach coordinator here at the Fair Housing Foundation. So a little bit about me. I studied human services at California State University of Fullerton. My role here with the Fair Housing Foundation is that I do strive to expand the community's understanding of the importance of fair housing through advocacy and awareness. So a little bit more personal about me is I definitely love to read. Science fiction is kind of my go-to. I also really enjoy playing soccer and generally enjoying the outdoors. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the next portion of today's celebration is the poster contest. So as mentioned earlier, the poster contest also followed our annual theme, which is Fair Housing, Transforming Communities. So a little bit as to why we kind of host this poster contest is to help engage the youth in starting to understand the significance of fair housing. So what we did is we invited students from the 4th grade through the 8th grade to submit a poster designed with our annual theme. Again, that theme being fair housing, transforming communities. So the following posters that we're going to show you all are going to really represent what that means to the youth in our community. So how are we gonna vote? So what's gonna happen is I'm going to go through the next few slides which are going to showcase the top 10 posters that were chosen by Fair Housing Foundation staff. I really wanted to show you all of the posters, but just because we are on a time constraint, our staff here at the Fair Housing Foundation did pick the top 10 posters just to make it a little bit easier. So once I go through each of the posters one by one, so have a pen and paper ready. We're going to go ahead and look at a slide that's going to have all 10 posters on that slide, at which point we're going to launch a poll so that you can actually select your favorite poster. And then we're going to be announcing the winner of our poster contest this Thursday via social media. So that's going to be through Facebook and Instagram. So if you're not already following us, do give us a follow so that you can see if the poster that you selected actually made it to our top 3. The winners of the poster contest will be also reached out to via email to let them know that they can claim their prize. So what are the prizes that these youth were able to win? So we have 3 different prizes for our top 3 submissions. The first of which is a Chromebook. Woo! Second place being a $75 Amazon gift card, and third place being a $50 gaming gift card for all of your gaming needs, being PlayStation, Xbox, Roblox, Nintendo Switch, etc. So now if you're thinking about how awesome these prizes were, but you didn't submit a poster, don't worry, there's always next year because we do host this poster contest annually. So you can go ahead and join the poster contest next year. So until then, I'm going to go ahead and start showing the posters that were submitted for this year. Do take note as to which ones are your favorite. So when I do get to the final slide in this poster contest session, you can go ahead and vote for your favorite. So here we go. All right, so here is the first one that we wanted to highlight. It's like, it always amazes me how talented young people can be. I cannot sketch at all. So we have 5 more to show. All right, and here we have our 10th submission for the poster contest. All right, so I hope you all enjoy taking a look at those posters that were submitted by the youth in our communities. So on this slide, I have all 10 being showcased. We're going to go ahead and have Stella launch the poll here so that you all can participate in voting for your top favorite poster. All right, so the poll is now open. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to go ahead and drop in your faves. So I'll give you a 30-second reminder before time is up and the poll is closed forever. Looks like it's going to be a close one, everyone. So I do have someone who raised their hand. If you had a question about the poster contest, unfortunately, I can't have, the audio doesn't work both ways, but if you had a question, feel free to drop it into the chat so I can go ahead and answer it. All right, so we're gonna allow for another 30 seconds for your last chance to submit your vote. Okay, so I have some people might not have been able to have access to that poll. So if you're not able to drop in your answer into the actual poll, feel free to drop in your answers into the chat, but please only do one choice. Thank you. All right, 10 seconds, everyone. Last chance to put in your vote for your favorite poster. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and close the polling. If you weren't able to put in your vote, do feel free to go to our social media page on Facebook or Instagram, where you can still drop in your favorite. But again, only single voting. It's going to be Scout's honor. But thank you everyone who participated in our poster contest voting. Let's see, and I'm going to go ahead and have us move on to the next portion, and I'll have you all meet Liz Castro.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Liz Castro, the project specialist here and head of the rental counseling program for Fair Housing Foundation. For 12 years, I have been lucky enough to be part of a team who has advocated for equal housing and not once relented in our mission, which is why I'm happy that we're celebrating here today. So a little bit about me is that I am fluent in ASL. I am a HUD certified housing counselor. And for fun, I love to bake with my daughters. So enough about that. Now on to the raffles. This is just one way that we can show our appreciation to those of you who have joined us in celebrating Fair Housing Month. But I can't move on without saying many, many thanks to our incredible donors. So luckily, everyone's RSVP has automatically entered them for a chance to win. Once we know who the winners are, we will be reaching out via email or phone number to talk a little bit more on how to collect your prize. All right, so first up, our first donation comes from the Angels Club, and it is a signed photo of head coach Joe Madden. So we're going to spin the wheel and see who the lucky winner is. Diana Salinas of Anaheim, congratulations on your win. All right, so the second donation comes to us from John's Incredible Pizza. It will be for 2 people to enjoy a buffet and beverage admission pass. So let's spin the wheel and see who's going to get to enjoy that delicious food. I don't know if anybody's ever been, but Their food is pretty good. All right, Sergio Barrios of Downey, congratulations. All right, so our third donation comes from Oriental Trading. This lucky winner will be able to enjoy a $25 gift certificate to purchase online anything they desire. So let's spin the wheel. It's great so many people were able to join us today, but only if you can win. We still appreciate you taking time. So Susan Sund of Buena Park, congratulations. All right, so for our fourth and fifth place winners, this comes to us from the Emerald Isle Golf Course, and they will be able to enjoy a round of golf for 2 individuals. So let's see who's going to get the first certificate for 2. Who doesn't like to golf by the ocean, right? And Tanya Garcia, maybe? Yes, it is, of Anaheim. You are a winner of the first certificate. We're going to spin again for that second certificate for a round of golf for 2 at the Emerald Isle Golf Club. And Diana Salinas of Anaheim, congratulations. So congratulations to our winners. We're really excited for you. We do have some more raffles. So next I'm going to be introducing Sonia Barto. She's one of our amazing housing counselors who will take it from here.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sonia Barto. I'm a housing counselor with Fair Housing Foundation. I specialize in landlord-tenant matters, and I was actually a paralegal for 3 decades for a public law interest group or organization. A little bit about me: I like to have fun watching movies on Netflix, Disney, and Prime with my family. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to move on to the next raffle, which is 1 pie a month for a year. This is a donation by Polly's Pies. So you're going to be enjoying 12 pie certificates, 1 for every month. And our winner is Judith Lopez of Bellflower. Congratulations. The next raffle is 2 unlimited ride wristbands, donation of Santa Monica Pier. And the winner is Angelica Vargas of Santa Ana. Congratulations. And now I'd like to move on to our next housing counselor, Martin Salinas.
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, I am the other housing counselor here at the Fair Housing Foundation. A little bit about myself is that I studied community leadership at California State University, Los Angeles. I've also worked as a youth leader where we led programs and lesson plans to help children go back into in-person learning. A couple things that I like to do for fun is I am very competitive, so I love going to arcades and bowling. Another thing that I like to do is go on road trips, specifically to the desert for some night stargazing. Now, the next item that we have for our donation comes from Sender 1, and where you can enjoy a class for bouldering or rock climbing, or you could just enjoy the facility for 2. And our winner for that is Connor Trout from the city of Winter Park. Congratulations. The next item that is for our raffles comes from Dinner Detective, in which you'll enjoy a dinner. However, there will be a murder mystery. And our winner for that will be Project New from the city of Long Beach. Congratulations. Enjoy. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce our receptionist, Miss Elizabeth Calderon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Calderon, the receptionist for Fair Housing Foundation. I'm the first voice clients here when calling in for assistance, and I always like to assure them that our priority is to help them in the best of our ability. A little about me is I enjoy baking and going fishing with my family. Now, I will be presenting the last two raffles for today. First off is going to be a $50 certificate for Wood Ranch Grill and Barbecue. And let's see who our winner is. Okay, it's going to be Jeremiah Andrews from LA. Congratulations. And our second raffle, it's going to be 2 admission tickets for the Aquarium of the Pacific. And let's see who the lucky winner is. It's going to be Marian Corral from La Habra. Congratulations to our winners. And that was our last raffle for today. So up next, we'll have Stella Verdeja, our executive director, with some closing remarks. Thank you.
I would like to thank both of our speakers, Kara Brodfuehrer and Arezoo Shahbazi. Thank you for all the hard work that you do and the excellent talks you provided us today. In addition, I would like to thank the Fair Housing staff for all their hard work and their continuous dedication to the cause. I would like to thank everyone for attending our Fair Housing celebration today. Now is the time to renew our commitment to enhancing the community's awareness of fair housing rights and emphasizing the importance of ending housing discrimination. I hope today's celebration has inspired you to be stronger advocates for fair housing. If you or someone you know has experienced discrimination, please contact us. We are here to help. And as we end this program, let us take the time to remember the theme of today: fair housing, transforming communities. Let us all work together to start transforming our community towards a brighter and stronger future. Thank you from all of us at the Fair Housing Foundation.